This is our Dart Monkey homemade PVC case rocket motor. It's our simplest, easiest to build motor. Can we make it even simpler? Let's find out. Great news! Rotary Rocketry t-shirts are now available for you with a variety of different graphics and colors to choose from. There's a link to our shop down in the description. We'll talk more about that later. Let's get to the project. This is our Dart Monkey motor. It's a single-use PVC case motor and it's filled with flexi-fuel sugar fuel. We use that motor to launch some of our smaller rockets like this 3-inch rocket. It gets this rocket to about 800 to 1,000 feet. So the title of this video says that we're going to simplify this motor. Well, that's a little bit of a problem because this motor is already extremely simple to build, and in fact, I can't think of a single thing I would do to actually make building this motor easier. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to simplify this motor by reducing the number of parts. And by doing that, we're also going to significantly decrease the cost of building this motor. So the most expensive part about building this motor is the two PVC end caps. Now, a few years ago, these used to be fairly inexpensive, about 30 to 40 cents a piece. But in the last few years, the price of PVC fittings has skyrocketed here in the United States. And these now cost me $1.34 a piece at my local hardware store, which is ridiculous. So 2 caps for this motor is $2.68. That is, in fact, 58% of the total cost of making this motor. So if we can eliminate these caps and substitute them with something much less expensive like maybe anchoring cement, then we could reduce the cost of this motor by over 50%. In fact, the target price of building the motor that we're going to build today is only $1.95. And that's pretty reasonable for a single-use motor. Now there is a little bit of a trade-off here. Even though we're going to reduce the cost of building this motor, it does mean we'll have to do a little bit of extra work. Nothing real major, mostly just drilling some extra holes in the PVC. Now I also don't know if the build we're going to be doing today is going to be successful because I've never built it this way before. This will be my first time. So let's take a look at all the parts, tools, and supplies we're going to need to make this motor. A piece of 1¼ Schedule 40 PVC pipe. It needs to be at least 5 3/4 inches long. A 1-inch outside diameter fender washer. The inside diameter is not important as long as it's smaller than 19/64 of an inch. Anchoring cement. You don't need to use this brand, but it should be anchoring cement. A foam earplug. Now there's different styles of earplugs. There's only a couple things that are important here. It needs to be able to stand up by itself, and it needs to be about 1 inch long. This style of earplug is exactly 1 inch long. A 3/4 inch diameter coring rod. This is a 3/4 inch steel rod and it has a point on one end. A core rod centering tool. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. An electric cooktop, a non-stick pan, and a spatula. A gram scale. An infrared thermometer. A 19/64 drill bit and a 7/32 drill bit. A drill. Needle nose pliers. Scissors. A ruler. A pen or fine tip Sharpie marker. A piece of rough sandpaper. Anything between about 40 and 60 grit would be fine. A small mixing cup and a spoon. WD-40 spray oil or similar product. Masking tape. Small piece of paper. Glue. This could be white craft glue or wood glue, it doesn't really matter. 2-part 5-minute epoxy and a small piece of cardboard and a stick to mix the epoxy. Water. Safety glasses and gloves. A saw or similar item to cut the PVC. First thing we need to do is cut a length of the PVC pipe, 5 3/4 inches long. Now it doesn't matter what you use. You could use PVC cutters, or you could use a hacksaw or a bandsaw or a miter saw. It really doesn't matter. As long as you get a nice straight cut. We do need the PVC to be able to stand up nice and straight on a table. Now the easiest tool for me here in the shop to do this is the radial arm saw. So I'll measure a piece 5 3/4 inches. Safety glasses and gloves, and we'll cut that off. Next, we're going to make several marks on the PVC to show us where we're going to be drilling some holes. So the position of these marks is not extremely critical. So I'm just going to make a mark right here at the top of the pipe, and then I'll come straight down and make another mark at the bottom. Turn that this way. So this half circle here I want to divide into 3 equal sections. So I'll make a mark here and a mark there. Again, it's not extremely critical, the exact placement. So we'll turn that around. We'll do the same thing for the other half circle. A mark here and a mark there. So now we have 6 marks, and they're all fairly evenly spaced. Now we'll take the ruler and we'll lay it on the pipe right next to one of those marks on the top, and we'll just draw a little line about a 1/2 inch down on the pipe. And we'll repeat that for each one of those marks. Now we'll take the ruler, and on each one of those lines we'll measure down from the top of the PVC 3/8 of an inch and make a little mark like that. And there's all of those marks. Now those locations are where we need to drill a 7/32 inch hole. Now I could do this with a hand drill, but it's a lot easier to do on the drill press. And don't forget your safety gear. Now that those holes are all drilled, I want to scuff up the inside of the PVC up to about 1 inch down with the really rough sandpaper. Now, I think it's going to be easier if I just take a strip of the sandpaper like this. I'll just spend a minute or two scuffing that up. All right, that's as far as we can go with the PVC pipe for now. Let's move on to the earplug and the nozzle washer. Now I need to drill a 19/64 diameter hole into the center of the nozzle washer. I could use a hand drill, but it is a lot easier with the drill press and a vise. Now I need to make a couple of marks around the center of this earplug, and because this earplug is 1 inch long, then I can just hold it against the ruler and make a couple of marks around the outside at the 1/2 inch mark. Now I'll just roll and squeeze the earplug so that I can put it into the washer. I'll position the washer right over those marks that I made at the halfway point, and we'll let the earplug expand. Once it's completely expanded, you can set it down on the table and make sure that it sits level. If the washer is a little bit crooked, we can just adjust it a little bit in the earplug until the washer sits nice and level. Now I'm going to take some masking tape, and I'm just going to put a piece around the PVC pipe just to cover all 6 of those holes. Now I'm going to take a couple of pieces of masking tape. Now for this wide tape, 2 pieces will be enough for what I need to do. If you have a more narrow tape, you might need 3, but we'll stick those together, and it just needs to be at least as wide as the outside of the PVC pipe. So we'll lay that down on the table, sticky side up, and we'll take the earplug and just stick it down right in the center. Just kind of give it a little tap just so it stays there. And then I'm going to place the PVC pipe with the tape and the holes down over that, but at the same time I'm going to be looking down in the center to make sure that the washer is centered inside the pipe. And then push down a little bit on the PVC pipe just to get a good seal of that tape around the bottom of the pipe. Now I'm ready to mix up some anchoring cement. Now I'm going to be following the instructions for this brand. If you're using a different brand, make sure you read their instructions. 2 heaping teaspoons should be just about right for this project. Probably actually make a little extra, but it's definitely better to mix up too much rather than too little. And the consistency I'm looking for here is pancake batter. So I'll start off with just a little bit of water. If I end up adding too much water, which I just did, I'll just add some more anchoring cement to that to thicken that up. Okay, so I've got that just about to the consistency that I want, similar to pancake batter. For this particular product, after you get it completely mixed, they want you to let it sit for 1 minute.
1 minute later.
All right, after 1 minute, we'll give it another quick stir, and it's ready to pour. Now I'm going to pour it down right on top of the earplug so it kind of dribbles around it. The tape should hold everything in place so that the earplug doesn't fall over, but I still want to pour kind of slow. And the tape should also form a nice seal around the bottom here so that we shouldn't get any coming out around the bottom of the PVC pipe. I'm going to pour it in just until we've just barely covered the top of the earplug. So I'll probably just see the tiny bump of the top of the earplug at the top of the anchoring cement. I've got that exactly where I want it. I can just barely see the bump of the earplug sticking up at the top of the anchoring cement. It's a good idea just to give this a little bit of a tap just to help that anchoring cement settle in place. And then we need to give that some time to set up. For this particular brand, that's about 20 to 30 minutes. And we'll go ahead and clean out our mixing container because we'll be using that again later.
20 minutes later.
It's been about 20 minutes, so we can go ahead and take that tape off the bottom. And there's the bottom of the earplug. We can also take the tape off around the holes as well. They should all be filled in with anchoring cement. And then we need to get out the earplug. Now, you're probably going to need needle nose pliers for that. So we'll get in there and just grab that earplug, and it should pop right out. If you do end up destroying it, that's no big deal. It's just an earplug. Now with the earplug removed, we don't actually have a hole all the way through the nozzle yet because the anchoring cement formed a little skin coating on top of the earplug. So if we just take our coring rod that's got the sharp point on the top there, we can just poke around at the top there and break through that thin layer of anchoring cement. And then we have our nozzle hole. Now we do want to make sure that the hole that we made through the anchoring cement there is at least the same size as the nozzle washer, which was that 19/64 drill bit. So we just run that up through the nozzle and make sure that it goes all the way up through the washer and the anchoring cement. So that is just fine. So the next step is going to be pouring fuel into here, but there's still a lot of moisture in that anchoring cement, and we need to get rid of that moisture before we get the fuel on top. So we're just going to let this sit for a couple of hours. Sometimes I'll let them sit overnight, but at least a couple of hours minimum. And if you leave it on its side, that'll help that moisture evaporate a little bit better because you'll have airflow on both sides. Now before we get to the fuel, let's take a look at the core rod and the core rod alignment tool. Now the core rod is just a 3/4 inch diameter piece of steel. This could be steel or aluminum, it doesn't matter as long as it's a nice smooth finish. And I sanded this with fine sandpaper to get it nice and smooth. And on one end I made a point. Now I did this on my lathe, but you could also do that on a grinding wheel as well. That just helps it go through the fuel a little bit easier. The alignment tool was made from a dowel. The outside diameter just fits into the 1¼ inch PVC pipe, and the inside just fits onto the coring rod. Now, to help keep this from sticking to the fuel, I put a couple of coats of polyurethane on it, and the bottom surface here that's actually going to be pushing against the fuel, I put a little layer of 2-part epoxy just to close the pores up. Hopefully that'll keep it from sticking to the fuel. Now, while I go get everything set up to make the fuel, here's a little something for you guys. No!
Give me the shirt!
No!
Give me the shirt!
No!
Hey guys, you don't need to fight over a rotary rocketry t-shirt.
We don't?
Show him where he can get his own.
Oh, cool! Wow!
Nice shirt.
Warning. Purchasing a rotary rocketry t-shirt may result in envy or jealousy from friends and family. T-shirt does not magically appear on your body. You need to purchase it and put it on yourself.
Available in a wide range of colors with a variety of graphics. Get yours today.
Now, before we make the fuel, we need to cap off the top of the nozzle so that the fuel doesn't pour down through and fill up the nozzle. So we'll just take our piece of paper, and the easiest way to get the right size circle here is just to take a small sliver of the PVC pipe and trace on the inside of that. And then we'll just use our scissors to cut that out. Then I'll just put a little bit of the glue on that paper, spread that around a little bit on one side, and then place that into the PVC pipe. Now, if it doesn't land with the glue side down, just dump it out and try it again. And then just to keep that in place, because it likes to curl up a little bit with the glue on it, I can just tamp that down with the coring rod. All right, so I'm going to start out by spraying the coring rod with the WD-40. Make sure we got complete coverage on that. And then also spray the core rod alignment tool as well. And I'll go ahead and just pour the fuel carefully into the motor. I want to make sure we get all of it out of the pan. And I'll scrape the last little bit off of the spatula. I'm just going to use the bottom of the core rod alignment tool just to kind of tap down the top of the fuel there just to level it out. And then go ahead and give the rod one more spray of oil. And the same with the alignment tool. Put that in. I'm going to leave the alignment tool up a little bit off of the surface of the fuel. Go ahead and get the rod inserted. We'll kind of push down on both, but as we push down on the core rod, eventually the alignment tool is going to get pushed up by the fuel. We just want to get that rod all the way through so that it pokes through the paper on the bottom, and we should see the tip of that right through the bottom of the nozzle. And then with everything pushed down nice and firm, we just need to let that sit for about 10 or 15 minutes until that fuel cools down. While we wait for the fuel to harden, we can rinse this out in the sink. The fuel is water soluble, so the water will just dissolve the fuel.
20 minutes later.
All right, so it's been about 20 minutes. I gave it a little extra time because it's a little hot today. So let's see how this comes out. The coring rod comes out very nicely, and the centering tool nice as well. It's beautifully flat on the top. I'll show you a close-up of that here. Sometimes the fuel kind of gets stuck in the nozzle around the point of the coring rod. So if I take that 19/64 of an inch drill bit that we used to drill through the nozzle washer, we can just bore up through there and make sure that there's no fuel blocking the nozzle opening. Now to finish off the top of this motor, we're going to fill that with anchoring cement, but I only want a 1/2 inch cap of anchoring cement, and if we measure down from the top of the PVC to the top of the fuel, we see that it is 15/16 of an inch. So I'm going to take this over to the saw and cut off 7/16 of an inch, so I only have 1/2 inch of PVC sticking up past the fuel. Now we need to block off the core hole in the center of the fuel so that when we pour anchoring cement on top here, it doesn't just flow inside the core of the fuel. So what I'm going to do is take my piece of paper and the 3/4 inch diameter coring rod and just draw a circle around the rod. And then I'll go ahead and cut that out, but I'm going to cut it out about 1/8 of an inch bigger all the way around. Just like that. Now we'll mix up just a little bit of our 2-part epoxy, and we're going to glue this on top of the fuel just to cover the hole, like that. Now we only need to mix up a very tiny amount of epoxy to glue that paper in place, but before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and wipe off the top of the fuel because it has some residual oil on it from the coring process, and that's going to prevent the epoxy from sticking there. I'm just going to use my little mixing stick here to just place a little ring of epoxy just around the core hole. And then I'll place the piece of paper centered right over the hole and just tap that down in place. Now I'm going to mix up a larger batch of the 2-part epoxy. Now I don't need to give this epoxy on the paper any time to harden because by the time we get all this mixed up, that will have already started to set up, so that's just fine. Now the reason we need more epoxy is we want to spread a thin layer of epoxy all over the top of the fuel. See, we're going to pour in anchoring cement onto here, and the anchoring cement contains a lot of water, and we don't want water coming in contact with our fuel. Now that the epoxy is thoroughly mixed, I'll just pour that down on top of the fuel. And then I'll spread that around so it completely covers the fuel. I'm going to leave that for about a 1/2 hour to let that epoxy harden. But before I go away, I'm going to roll up an earplug and stick that up into the nozzle to seal that up. And now the fuel is sealed airtight.
2 hours later.
So I ended up letting that epoxy sit for a couple of hours. Even though it's 5-minute epoxy, it's still sticky and tacky for quite a long time. So I just waited a few hours until it was no longer tacky. Now we need to drill 6 small holes around the top of the PVC pipe, just like we did around the bottom. So just like we did on the other end, I'll just make a small mark here on the top and a small mark directly opposite that. Turn that 90 degrees, and this half circle I'll divide into 3 parts with 2 additional lines. And then this half circle, I'll divide that into 3 parts with 2 lines. That gives us 6 points. Then I'll take my ruler and place it next to one of those lines and draw a short line down the side of the PVC pipe. I'll repeat that for all 6 of the marks. Now that we have all those lines, we'll use the ruler to measure down from the top of the PVC 1/4 inch and put a mark. I'll repeat that for all 6 of the lines, and then we'll go over to the drill press and we'll drill holes at those marks with the 7/32 drill bit. When you're drilling through PVC with this type of drill bit, it's very important to go very slow. If you try to go too fast, it can grab the PVC and either spin it or lift it or even crack it if you're this close to the edge. So you need to drill very slowly. Now that I have all those holes drilled, I'll take a small piece of that rough sandpaper and scuff up the inside of the PVC just like we did on the other end. And now I'll put a layer of masking tape around the PVC to cover those holes. Now I noticed on the other end where we poured the anchoring cement for the nozzle that we ended up with some little air pockets at the tops of each one of these holes. Now I don't think it's going to be a problem, but I would prefer the holes to be completely filled. So what I'm going to do up here is everywhere there's a hole, I'm just going to poke a couple of holes with a needle at the top of the hole so that the air can escape, and hopefully we won't end up with those little air pockets. All right, we're just about done. We need to mix up some more of our anchoring cement to fill in the top of the PVC pipe here. I think just about 2 heaping spoonfuls should be more than enough for that little space. And again, we're just looking for something that's about pancake batter consistency for this particular brand. And I'll just pour that slowly into the top of the motor until we reach the top of the PVC. I think it's a good idea just to tap it a little bit. I think that helps get the anchoring cement probably to settle in those holes a little bit, as well as get out any air bubbles. And then we just need to let that sit for 20 minutes.
20 minutes later.
And now I'll remove the tape. And it looks like putting those little pinholes really helped. The holes are completely filled with anchoring cement. All right, this motor is ready to test. Now, just a couple of quick notes about this type of motor and this type of fuel with the center core hole. These are ignited at the top, so when you insert the igniter into the nozzle, it gets inserted all the way up into the motor until it stops. So we're all the way up here with the igniter. That way the center core gets ignited really quickly. And you also want to keep the nozzle hole sealed so that the fuel is airtight. You don't want moisture in the air to get to that sugar fuel. So let's head out for a test. I let that anchoring cement sit overnight just to be sure it was completely hardened and all the moisture had evaporated out. Now there's 2 potential problems I see with this motor. One is that one of the end caps of anchoring cement will simply blow out. The other possibility is that the casing may explode. Now in the other design where we have end caps over both sides, the casing is a little bit stronger because of that extra layer of PVC that this one doesn't have. Let's see how it does. Test in 3, 2, 1. Well, the motor held together, so that's great. I was a little surprised at the very slow startup, and that may present a problem lifting a rocket off of the launch rod, so I'll take a closer look at that footage when I get back to the shop. Now, while I was building that motor, I was actually building 2, so we have another identical one here. Let's go ahead and test this one. Test number 2 in 3, 2, 1. Two successful motor tests. That was fantastic and maybe a little bit unexpected. I kind of expected the end caps to blow out, but they went perfect. And I compared the video from those 2 tests side by side, and the burn rates of the 2 motors were basically identical. So I cut the second motor open just to take a look at the inside and see how it held up. This is the bulkhead end, and inside there's a little bit of burnt epoxy there, but the anchoring cement is perfectly fine. And the nozzle end is also fine. Now, an interesting thing that I've noticed on these motors before with this type of anchoring cement nozzle, when we build it, it really doesn't have a convergent that's funneling the gases into the nozzle. It really just has a hole. And then on the other end, it really doesn't have much of a divergent for the expanding gases coming out. There's a slight taper to the anchoring cement because there's a slight taper to the earplug, but it's only a couple of degrees. It's not a significant divergent. But what happens is, as the motor's burning, the hot gases actually erode the inside here of the anchoring cement, and they actually form a curve and a convergent angle towards the nozzle. And then on the other end, they actually expand and rip away some of the anchoring cement, forming a divergent. I just think that's kind of interesting that it forms its own convergent and divergent angles. So we've got two successful versions of this motor. So what are the pros and cons between the two versions of it? Well, the version with the end caps costs $4.63 to make, and the version that we made today with the anchoring cement at both ends only costs $1.95. So that's a 58% decrease in cost to build this version. So that's definitely a con to this one, that it costs more. The pro on the end cap model, though, is that it is honestly a lot easier and a lot faster to build. There were a lot of extra steps involved in making the one that we made today. So that's really the con to this model that we made, is just the extra time and the extra steps that it took to build it. You save some money, but you do have to put in a little bit more work. So overall, I'm really happy with this new design, and I am planning on building a small 3-inch rocket that holds this, and we'll do a test launch on it in a future video. Hey, if you're not subscribed to the channel, now would be a great time to hit that subscribe button. Don't miss out on any of our future content. And if you're still watching the video and you haven't hit that like button, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and hit that like button. We really appreciate it. And don't forget to check out the shirts available in our shop. The link is down in the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.